I just love Warhammer. Truly, I do. I have played Warhammer for more than 2 decades by now, and I have so many fond memories with this game. I have made friendships because of Warhammer, and I've met players from all around the world while going to tournaments and such. And yeah, Warhammer is the game for me. But not each and every experience is just as fun as the others. And this video is about one of those less than happy experiences. You know, sometimes shit just happens. So please sit down and sip some coffee and listen to my story. I'm Danish. I live on an island called Bornholm in the eastern part of Denmark. Back in 2010, I moved to Copenhagen, the capital of my country. I was deeply into Warhammer Fantasy Battles back then and was eager to find someone to play games with back then. I had some friends on Bornholm that I usually played games with before I moved, but I didn't really know anyone who played Warhammer in Copenhagen. Being the biggest city in Denmark, it didn't take me long to find several other players to game with. 8th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battles was brand new back then, so I decided to collect a new army when 8th edition released. I had played with my dearest Bretonians since I began playing Warhammer with the release of Warhammer Fantasy 5th edition. So it was time for something completely different for me, so I went with Beastmen, recently renamed from Beasts of Chaos during the late 7th edition of that game. Like I mentioned, I found a group of players whom I played with regularly. Nice folks who love to play the game casually, just like myself. At one point, Games Workshop released an expansion campaign for Warhammer Fantasy called Blood in the Badlands. I don't know if you heard about that campaign, but the premise is about different armies traveling to the Badlands, fighting battles over the course of a year. The rules included cool stuff such as rules for siege battles, fighting underground, new spells and multiplayer battles, and much more. I can only highly recommend checking it out and maybe try and convert it to the old world rule set. I bought the book and convinced my group of players, whom were now my friends, to try it out. And so we did. We bought the Mighty Empires box set and then went on to build and paint a map over the Badlands that we were going to be fighting over. Not all of us used places like Facebook back then, and this was before Discord existed. So we used a Danish forum dedicated to Warhammer players to communicate, agree when to play games against each other, and update the status of the campaign for all on the forum to see. My beastmen were ready, and so was the armies of the rest of my playing group, so we went to war in the Badlands. We were 5 players fighting in this campaign in total. I brought my beastmen and I was facing high elves, vampire counts, orcs and goblins, and tomb kings. We played several games and had so much fun with the rules of this campaign. Again, I can only highly recommend checking it out if you ever get the chance. We were almost halfway through our Warhammer adventure in the Badlands when things turned sour. A new campaign turn had begun and we moved our armies around the map. My beastmen moved into an area controlled by the orcs and goblins player, prompting a clash between those 2 armies. We all agreed on a date where our games would be played out, and we went our separate ways for the evening. A few days passed. My game against the orc and goblin player was yet to come up, when the player I was facing wrote in the forum that he sadly was hindered to play against me because something had come up. I don't recall what it was, but the case in point was that he was hindered. So, he asked the Vampire Counts player to stand in for him instead. He borrowed him his Orcs and Goblin army, and we all agreed that I would face him instead at my apartment. The day of the game came up, and the hindered Orc and Goblin player wrote me a text asking if he could swing by my place and watch the game. I was a little baffled, because I thought he was hindered, and I was supposed to play against his stand-in. He still wanted me to play against his stand-in, he just wanted to watch the game, he told me. I thought it was a little strange. I mean, if you have the time to play your own game anyway, then why not just do it? Anyways, he showed up and even brought some pizza. His stand-in also showed up and we played our game together while the hindered player watched along eating pizza. It was a fun game as far as I remember, a lot of back and forth moments where my beastmen eventually came out on top, winning the game and thus claiming a piece of territory on our campaign map. We all shook hands and they both left my apartment. This game was played during the day. That same night I sat down in front of my computer and went to the forum to update the campaign progress, sharing with everyone that I won today's game and thus had grabbed a piece of terrain in the Badlands. My original opponent, the one who claimed he didn't have the time to play against me that day, yet still showed up and watched the entire game while eating pizza, suddenly objected to my post. Yes, he claimed that the game didn't count, he wouldn't accept the outcome and demanded a rematch because he didn't feel his stand-in player played his Orcs and Goblins correctly. I was flabbergasted. I wrote back, "Fun joke, mate," because I was convinced he was trying to pull my leg. But no, he was really serious and then started to get really mad about the subject. I was supposedly borderline cheating by fighting a player who was inexperienced in playing Orcs and Goblins, and I didn't deserve my win. I tried, calmly mind you, to explain to him that not only did we play the game we all agreed upon, he was even there watching it while stuffing his mouth with pizza. I thought that he should at least respect the time and energy that went into playing that game, which again we had all agreed on should happen. But no, there was no reasoning with him or salvation to be had. The dude was now furious. We argued back and forth for a good while on the forum, before the eyes of many curious readers. No one interfered, but let me just say, popcorn was being made around the country, as people sat and watched our little debate. In the moment this happened, I thought this was kinda a brain-dead situation. I was honestly certain he joked at first, but no. He demanded a rematch, nullifying the game, time and energy I had spent with his stand-in, which he himself asked for. I therefore refused a rematch, saying that this particular game had already been played and we should all move on with our campaign. But no, nothing but total refusal from my opponent, and certainly no reasoning with him either. I freely admit I was very frustrated with our heated debate online, so I just stopped responding to him in the end and went offline. A couple of other players from my group, or our group I should say, texted me in private, asking why my opponent apparently went insane. I then responded back, asking why they could tell me that in private but not have my back in the online forum. The silence was deafening. What really bothered me about this event was not my very unreasonable and angry opponent, but the lack of open support from the rest of the group. Everyone could see my opponent was unreasonable and disrespectful, but he didn't say anything about it in public. That was the true issue of this story for me, the silence. The lack of support against a man who was clearly in the wrong, with an unreasonable demand to nullify a game that had already been played. I gave it some thought for a day or two, ignoring my still angry opponent in the forum, and then decided to quit the campaign altogether. I never played any of them ever again, but I don't regret my decision. The spirit of the game is a term that is often talked about and discussed between us Warhammer players, and to me, this was clearly a case where the spirit of the game was simply non-existent. I don't think I'm an unreasonable guy generally, but this affair crossed some boundaries for me, so I quit and never looked back. And that's the end of my little Warhammer horror story about how a fun campaign met an unfortunate end, but also on how to end friendships. Like I mentioned earlier, I had played several games in the past with all of them with no issue whatsoever until his brain fart. It was the lack of response from the rest of the group that made me quit, not the insanity of my Orc and Goblin opponent. Today I live on Bornholm again, not related to my story at all. This is just where I'm born and raised, and I have a few good people to play with over here. Other than that, I focus on painting my Wood Elf Realms army for the old world and creating videos from time to time on this channel. I still very much enjoy my hobby and everything it contains. My spirit is by no means broken, and I love what I do. With that said, if you're still listening, thank you very much for listening to my story. Do you have any personal horror stories related to this wonderful hobby of ours? If so, please share them down below in the comment section. Thanks again, and happy painting.